Hello everyone. In this lecture, we will be discussing the essay The Heart of Cultural Studies by Lawrence Grossberg. The author Lawrence Grossberg, he is an American scholar, cultural theorist, and also a professor known for his contributions to cultural studies, communication theory, and popular cultural analysis. And his works focus on intersections of culture, politics, and media, and he is also known for his works on youth culture, rock music, media theory, etc. And he has been influenced by theorists like Stuart Hall, Antonio Gramsci, Derrida, and many other scholars. And we also find that his writings also integrate the ideas of Marxism, structuralism, postmodernism, etc. Some of the major works that he has published is We Gotta Get Out of This Place, which came out in 1992, Caught in the Crossfire, Kids Politics in America's Future, which came out in the year 2005, Cultural Studies in the Future Tense, it came out in the year 2010, and Under the Cover of Chaos, Trump and the Battle for the American Rights, which came out in the year 2018. In the introduction to this essay, he talks about how cultural studies has gained recognition, but it also has faced a lot of criticism from various political perspectives. He says that every now and then we find people talking about cultural studies, how they engage in cultural studies, but then there is no approved universal definition for cultural studies. Some people believe that they are engaging in cultural studies, but actually what they are doing do not fall under the category. And some people who do some sort of studying, research, etc., and fail to realize that it comes under cultural studies. This happens because there is no universal definition, a definition which has been accepted by everyone. That is what he says. And he continues to explain what does not come under cultural studies and what can be considered as a part of cultural studies. So he says that when you look at cultural studies, it should not be simply about culture, though culture is central to its project. So it is not simply about culture, tradition, etc. It is not about interpreting text or reducing social realities to textual analysis. So you take a text and start interpreting it and associating it with the reality. That is not what cultural studies is about. It is not a study of national cultures, language studies, or area studies. It is not limited to mass culture, popular culture, or subaltern culture. So it includes all this, but it is not limited to this. And it does not treat theory as merely a metaphor for power. So again, in relation to the context of theory, it is not simply analyzing a text. That is not what cultural studies is about. And he says that cultural studies is concerned with describing and intervening in the ways cultural practices are produced within, inserted into, and operate in the everyday life of human beings and social formations, so as to reproduce, struggle against, and perhaps transform the existing structures of power. Now, this definition is quite important because it has two parts to it. In the first part, he says that it is simply the everyday performance, everyday how cultural practices are produced, how it becomes a part of already existing cultural practices. That is what cultural studies is about, understanding it, analyzing it. But the other side of cultural studies is kind of like a fight, a struggle against the existing structures of power. So he says that in order for a new culture to be established, in order for a new practice to be established as culture, sometimes there is a struggle against the structures of power. And that also becomes a part of cultural studies. Something that has been so static for a long period of time, it is very difficult to change such kind of things. But that doesn't mean newer cultures are not born. It is born when there is proper power struggles happening as well. This is what he mentions in the introduction to the essay. Now we'll be looking at only certain parts of the essay, starting off with his search of the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies. So, Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies, how he got an opportunity to attend the CCCS at Birmingham University in 1968. So, he says that he did not know anything about the CCCS. It was some sort of fate that brought him there. It was not his interest, but the other people in his life who showed interest for him to go into CCCS, and that is how he reached there. Now, he says that when he had reached the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies, the political events that were happening all around the world had also influenced him. There were certain political struggles happening. The Vietnam War was happening. There were cultural shifts happening. So we are talking about 1968, 1960s. The Black Power movements were there, feminist movements were there, the protest against war was happening. So all these changes were happening simultaneously, and it also brought about a cultural shift in youth and subcultures as well. So this was happening while he enrolled in the CCCS. So he says that he was not familiar with Richard Hogarth or Stuart Hall, who these people were. He did not know anything about cultural studies. The CCCS, now we think of it as an important landmark for cultural studies, but earlier then it was just established and people were still trying to figure out what it was. So he is saying that he joined this place without actually knowing who these people are, what this institution was trying to teach, etc. And as he became a part of this place, he started understanding who these people were, what were their contributions to cultural studies, what were their definitions of cultural studies. So he says that Hogarth's belief was that culture, especially literature, art, and expressive culture more broadly, provided a unique form of social knowledge that could not be accessed through other means. So Hogarth believed that any forms of literature, now when we talk about literature or language, it is not simply what we read, it includes art or any other form of expressive art. He believed that through this, new forms of social knowledge was emerging, new cultural formations were happening because of this, and therefore the center focused on understanding these forms of culture. And Hogarth pointed out that in order to understand the kind of knowledge generated from these kind of, let's say, literature, art, or expressive art, we have to understand it in two ways. So there are, he emphasized on two literary critical methods. The first one was reading for tone, the other one was reading for value. So what he said is that reading for tone is analyzing the psychological, cultural, and aesthetic nuances of the text, and value was not about making value judgments but about uncovering the underlying field of values expressed or resisted in a work. So these were the two ways in which you can analyze or access the knowledge stored in these literary works. So he said that first was through analyzing the psychological or cultural, whatever was very much evident, and the other one was identifying the underlying values in it. Continuing with his discussions about the CCCS, he also says that there are certain drawbacks to the CCCS vision. The first thing that he figured out was the physical and academic marginality. So we are talking about an institution, like I already mentioned, an institution, an idea that was established, that was recently established, let's say. The idea was becoming popular, and the political turmoils during that time did not encourage for such an institution to prosper as well. So we are talking about the physical and academic marginality. It was simply like a hut. People were in kind of like an asbestos roof was there. People were sitting under that, and they were studying. And also Hogarth, he was hired as a scholar, and he also had to establish this center without any sort of support. He did not get any financial support. Even the students who were part of this CCCS, they were not full-time scholars. Daytime they used to do some work, even some were army people. Then they used to come back and be a part of this institution. So there was no stability to what was happening over there. The second thing that he points out is the political contradictions of the 1960s. We already mentioned how there were ideological tensions, social movements, all this changes were happening during that period, and that also influenced the CCCS, the vision. Third one was the diversity and chaotic intellectual environment. So he says that the center was highly diverse through mainstream histories, often highlight only its most successful aspect. This diversity contributed to the center's dynamic but sometimes chaotic nature. What happens here is that the subjects being discussed, it is quite diverse in nature. So people think that when these kind of diversity is there, it shows the dynamic side of the center, but then sometimes it was becoming chaotic as well. Then he points out that a typical postgraduate students, many students were part-time commuters with jobs making them distinct from traditional academia. They engage with cultural studies, not just academically but as politically invested participants in the cultural phenomenon they studied. So like I mentioned, the students were not full-time students. They were working, then they when they felt that they needed to study, they would come to the institution. So there was no systematic process involved here, and also many of them simply considered it as a process that they had to go through. They did not give much importance to the vision of the CCCS.